obviously today we're doing a floor tile installation seminar. I'm going to go through this fairly quickly, try to touch on, well, I will touch on all the facets of installation, the materials required, substrates, the cutting utensils, and we're even going to do a little demonstration of that. I'm battling a bit of a cold here, so you have to bear with me today. Maybe the periodic interruption. I'll get right to it. We'll start with the tools required. Oh, by the way, I'm Tom. I should introduce myself. Tom Reeves. I've been in the industry for about 20 years. Did a little bit of everything. Removal, installation, cleaning, delivering, selling, a little bit of it all. So the history of tile. Again, today we're going to do installation of floor tiles. So we're going to start with our materials required for the installation of floor tile. So in the basics, we're going to require the use of some trowels, and we're going to use somewhere between a 1/4-inch trowel. You can get into anywhere from a 1/4 inch to, I've got a 5/16 and I've got a 1/2 inch. This will be determined by the size of the tile that you're installing. If you're installing on a perfectly flat surface with a 13 by 13 tile or smaller, chances are you can get away with a 1/4 inch trowel. Usually you're going to use at least a 3/8 trowel, 5/16, somewhere in that neighborhood. For most installations of the larger format, 12 by 24s, the 18 by 18s, even up to a 1/2 inch, depending on your substrate. Now, you know, sometimes there's little waves in concrete and things in basements, so you're going to use a larger trowel for that, particularly if your tile, and we do a lot of most of the installations these days are done with very large format tiles, 12 by 24 that you're standing on, 18 by 18s out on the other side, and even 20 by 20s. Those we're probably going to require a larger trowel. So that's our application for the thin set. And then we've got a grout flow, of course. This is going to apply our grout. And a grout sponge, of course, to clean with when we get to the grouting stages. We're going to have mixing pails, at least a mixing pail for your thin set, probably another one for your water so you can clean up as you go. A level is a good idea, whether you have an old school level like this, just to determine your floor scenario, how flat it is or isn't. Or, even better, is a laser level. If you have access to those are great. You can just set those, put them on the floor, and they fire right across the floor. And they light up the floor, and they show you the low areas, because those areas don't light up. And those are quite nice. Squares, whether it be a small one or a full-on square, to determine your corners and your starting points and how square your room is. Spacers are a good thing. Obviously, we're going to use spacers to keep us honest for our lines. Also, a chalk line. A chalk line is something we can use to lay out tile. When we start, we usually have a starting point against one wall, and a chalk line, you pull that out, and you've probably all seen them. They're in a little range. They look much like a measuring tape. You pull that chalk line out, get somebody to hold it at one end because you've pre-measured, and we'll get into that. And then snap your chalk line. That's your starting line. So that's a good tool along with your spacers. Of course, the aforementioned tape measure. Our cutting devices, and I'm going to get into all of those as well. We're going to want a wet saw, of which we rent. So if you don't have one, don't worry about it. We rent them and we sell them very inexpensively. A grinder is going to be handy for circular cuts. We're going to get into that as well. And of course, the trusty scoring snap and tile nippers for all of our straight cuts. We're going to do quite a bit of that. And that's our cutting devices. And then, of course, if we're using backer board, we're going to want to have cement board screws or backer board screws, which I'm going to demonstrate for you today. And our tile adhesive. We've got modified and unmodified. I'm going to elaborate on that. We're going to require some edging. These aren't necessarily tools, but extras for our tile. We'll get into that at a point as well. So that's basically, and of course a trusty pencil to mark your cuts, that's a given. And perhaps a pair of rubber gloves and safety glasses, of course, when you're cutting. And that's, for the most part, that's the materials required for tile installation. So our first area when we come into a room or when we're doing a room is area preparation. So we're going to determine what preparation is necessary. If you're doing a basement bathroom, for example, and it's never been touched, it's a concrete floor. So you're in luck there, you can tile right on that concrete floor. So you determine whether that concrete floor is level or requires leveling. If it doesn't, you can go right on your concrete floor with thin set and tile. If it's got a shiny paint that you put on there to keep it nice and tidy from days gone by, you might want to etch that. Give it a scratch or an etch or an acid wash so that it's prepared for tile. So that's the easy part. When we move upstairs to wooden subfloors, that's when there's a degree of preparation. So you may have, if you have existing tile, you're likely removing that tile. You may be removing some of the substrate that's underneath it, because in retrofits like that, we often have hardwood and carpet that we're going to have to butt up against as well, and we have to be mindful of that and premeditated as to how high that floor is going to be. So I often suggest when prepping existing floors that you pull up a heat register and have a look at what's there. People will say, well, I've got vinyl on the floor now. When I ask them how many layers do you have, well, I have no idea. Pull up a heat register. You can see the flooring on the cutout of the heat register. You can see what you're up against. And why do we want to do that? Well, again, we want to determine the height. Do we want to go over the subfloor plus some underlayment that's already there, put our underlayment on top, and then our tile and be up, you know, a quarter of an inch or a half inch above our hardwood? No, ultimately, we want to be level as best we can. So that's when we determine how high we're going to be. As far as the preparation goes, let's assume that we have removed that material. Generally, we're probably going to remove that material right down to the subfloor. The original, whether it be OSB, oriented strand board, or good old ply, we're going to remove it right down to the plywood in most cases. And once we get there, we now have to prepare with some form of substrate so that that floor is solid. You cannot install directly on a plywood subfloor. That's never a good idea. There's flex to it, there's deflection, and that can cause problems down the road with cracking. Tile is a very rigid product and thin set, and it doesn't want to move substantially. So if there's movement, we need to eliminate that movement. How do we do that? We do it, and I'm going to show you two of the better do-it-yourselfer methods today. We either do it with a cement board or a fiber rock board, or we do it with a coupling membrane, Decor, and I'm going to get into that, both of those methods today, because I believe, well, I know that they're the easiest methods for do-it-yourselfers, or anybody for that matter. You don't want to get into wire mesh and cement, really, if you're doing yourself. That's a lot of labor and a lot of work. These methods will work very well for you on your plywood subfloor. So, in that area preparation, assuming that we brought it down to the plywood, now what we want to do is we want to lay the area. We don't, as I often say in the showroom here, we don't start at the left side and hope everything works out at the right. We don't want any surprises. We want to lay that tile out. A good tile installer will take, if it takes an hour, if it takes 2 hours, it's well worth laying that area out. When I say an hour, that's generally main floors. When our guys do main floors, they go down the hall, in the kitchen, off here, into a powder room, into a mud room, a laundry room. That's a lot of turns in that. We want to know that that tile lays out well everywhere as best we can. So generally what a tile installer will do is he'll start at the most visible point, that's usually the hallway or the entry, with a full tile, and he'll dry lay that full tile out. So he'll put a dry tile down, include the grout joint, take that time, run it down the hallway, see how it ends there, and then run it into each room. So off he goes to the left or the right, or she, whomever's installing, and then off into the kitchen that way, just with the dry lay. That way, one row is all you need. that determines where things finish. You may get into the kitchen and not like where it finishes over here, so you want to alter it over here. That's how we sort of lay out and determine where all the tile ultimately sets itself. And of course, we want it centered in hallways. We want it in the most visible places. Those are the ones that count. If we sacrifice a full tile in the kitchen, but the hallway's got 2 full tiles and a little sliver, that's not going to work. Try to put your cuts in under cabinetry. Try and set it up fall in behind toilets and things like that. That's just logical. We want the full tile in the most visible areas. So in doing that, once we lay our tile out, that's when we generally chalk that line. So what we'll do is if we're in the hallway here and we've determined that we've got our tile centered here, and we've got our other tiles laid out here, we'll mark that tile. Usually it's a tile or 2 from the wall. You mark a little mark on the floor, put it down the hall, and that's when you snap that chalk line I talked about earlier. That is your starting point. And we really only need a north and south and a west and east. So we'll go 1 down the hallway and then 1 this way, and that gets our straight line started. And of course, once we put that first row of tile in, everything else is going to fall into place because the tiles are square and or rectangular, they match each other, and we go from there. So that's basically our setup, our area preparation, and our starting point. Where we actually start tiling is entirely up to you, but don't tile yourself into a corner. Never tile in and around and try and match back in. You always tile row by row by row and come out like this so that you've got, you start in like this and round yourself in and find out that all of a sudden you've got a ½ inch gouge on your middle, then you're in trouble. The job's all done. You met in the middle and it didn't work out. This way we know at least we're coming to the end of the wall. Cement board method, which I'll do first. If we're doing a cement board method, which I think is a good method, we have the luxury with cement board of using, or fiber rock board, of using a 1/4 inch and a 1/2 inch. I said earlier that we need an additional substrate on the plywood subfloor because it's not strong enough. You've probably been online and you've heard all kinds of different scenarios that you need 3/4 of an inch, an inch, an inch, and a bit. Bottom line is if you've got a subfloor that's fairly stable with minimal deflection, if you've got a lot of deflection in the subfloor, put a few screws in it prior before even starting, and then determine what we're going to work with. If you're working with cement board, it's very, very stable. A 1/4 inch plywood is not enough on the subfloor, but a 1/4 inch cement board is because it's very, very rigid. It's very durable. This is fiber rock board, which is much like cement board. They're one and the same, really. It's going to take that deflection out and make it very solid. It comes in 1/4 inch and 1/2 inch, and you would determine that by what you require. If you had a higher floor and you needed a 1/2 inch because you've got to get a total of an inch to meet your existing hardwood, then use the 1/2 inch. That's what I said earlier about determining where it's going to end up in relation to your existing floors. Today we're going to use 1/4 inch, and I'm going to show you how we apply that. So with that cement board, assuming that everything is all set up, we haven't chalked our line yet because obviously it's going to go on that. We just determined where I sort of got ahead of the application of the board when I said about the installation and preparation of it. We're going to lay the board first, of course, and then after the board is laid down, that's when we chalk all our lines and do our layout. So in doing that, we're going to mix our thin set. I'm using a modified thin set today. I'll explain the difference in the features. We're going to use 2 different kinds. You're going to mix your thin set. The instructions are on the bag. When you're mixing thin set, mix it to a nice peanut butter consistency so it hangs a little bit on your trowel. That's what we want. I think that's the best analogy as to a peanut butter type consistency. We don't want it too dry. We don't want it too wet. Thin set that's too dry is never good. The whole reasoning behind thin set is that, or mortars, is that the moisture is spread between the substrate and the tile. So it shares that moisture. So we don't want it too too dry. When it's too dry, you'll know it. It'll roll and ball up on you. When it's too wet, of course, the teeth will fall in, and I'll show you what I mean. When I trowel this out, it leaves the teeth mark. If that's too wet, it'll sort of sink on you. You can't miss it. You'll see it happen. If you've got that peanut butter consistency, you're fine. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to glue and screw that board down. Do you have to apply thin set onto the board? Not necessarily, but I like to. It just adds that rigidity and strength, and that board is not going anywhere because of that. So I don't mind putting a little thin set. Whether you put it on the back of the board or the floor is up to you. I prefer to just put it out on the floor. And do you have to cover every inch? Not necessarily, but if you're going to do it, you might as well do it right. There's I'm just using a 1/4 inch and troweling it fairly tight. And I'm going to apply my board. Down and make sure it's nice and solid. And of course, you're going to do your entire floor like that. You can join those together. These fiber rocks are 4x4, so they go down very quickly. Cement board's 3x5. Goes down fairly quickly. Seam them up closely, have them as tight as you can. You don't have to tape, you don't have to seam, you don't do anything else as long as they're close together. And then once they are down, you'll see that this fiber rock actually has little marks where the screws go. There's a lot of marks there. We want you to put it every I would say every 2 to 4 inches, put those screws in. I would recommend the aforementioned cement board screws or backer board screws. They work like a charm. Backer board screws are fine with fiber rock. When you get into full-on cement board, you might want cement board screws. They have an extra little taper in the edge and they go into that cement board quickly, very quickly. So once we have all of our board down and we've glued and screwed that board down, we now have a very solid surface that we're prepared to tile on. If for some reason you had any kind of wave or any kind of dips and doodles, you need to take that out prior to applying that board. So that requires, on a concrete floor, we have self-levelers that we can mix. Self-levelers are sort of soupy type thin sets that go down. Not a thin set, but a leveler. They're cement. And they are soupy, and you pour them into place and sort of help them on to cement floors. On wood floors, chances are you're probably going to have to put some wire mesh down and level that out. Most upper wood floors don't require leveling unless those houses are, 100 or more years old. Sometimes they start to dip and doodle in different areas, but you've already checked that because you took your laser level and you've determined where your low spots were. So take those out first before you put your cement board on. Then put your cement board on because you're covering it up. We don't care what it looks like. If there's some cement here, and patch over here, and patch over there, it doesn't matter. It's all going to get buried, and then cement board down. So our cement board is down, it's secure. We have set up our area and chalked our line, and we're ready to go. Now it's tile time. You've already determined your starting point, and we're ready to tile. Again, today I'm going to use a 1/4 inch. I'm only working with a 13 by 13 inch. You see, I'm only going to lay a couple of tiles here to show us how we get this done. 1/4 inch will be fine with this, or even a 3/8 with this. But as I said, a bigger tile, you're probably going to get into the 3/8 or even a 1/2 inch. So in applying tile, if the thin set is mixed appropriately, and what I do when I apply tile, I mix my thin set. I always check the first tile. So what I'll do is I'll put enough thin set out to lay the first tile. And this is when you want to get 100% coverage. You don't want 80%, 90%, not even 95%. We want 100% coverage, meaning we don't want any empty spots. I don't want to see any flooring. I want to trowel it out so that we see nothing but thin set, and that's when we start our tiling. We put our tile into place, and we push it in. I generally spread my hands over the entire tile and push that tile into place. Once that tile is down, that first tile, this is my little inspection. What this does, it tells me a couple things. I'll take, and you'll need a tool to pull it up, as you can see, because it really grabs. I want to pick that tile up, I want to look at it, and that's what I want to see. I want to see complete coverage of that tile. I could even stand to trowel that even a little taller and get all of this. If you're concerned about a really textured tile, and that's the issue here, this is a really textured tile on the back, what we would do there is we could back butter that tile. So back buttering tile, what we do there is when we lay our next tile. So back buttering, what that is we put our thin set on the floor with our trowel, but then what we also do is back butter the tile. Back buttering the tile is a great idea because it absolutely ensures that we've got 100% coverage. So there it is. We already know before we put that down that we've got 100% coverage. What do you think the adhesion factor is going to be when thin set meets thin set? The issue lately is a lot of the well, not lately, it's been going on for a while, the packaging, they'll sometimes be dusty in between. You pull your tile up, you've got a little bit of dust underneath it. They sometimes even do it intentionally. They put a chalky material in between the tile, so the bottom of one doesn't scratch the top of the other in the packaging. So in doing that, I would also recommend that you probably clean the bottom of your tiles quickly. Just get a little wipe with a damn cloth. But now that we've back buttered this, and we haven't really affected the height of the tile because we've just painted basically back the tile. Then we're putting that into place, like so. Now, and I'm sure you guys have all heard of the Decor Schluter method. If you haven't, Schluter is a company that provides coupling membrane. This is a bit of a different scenario. This is a coupling membrane that actually provides a slight little movement in between. There's little bridges in here that allow this to sort of absorb a little flexibility. So this is a bit of a different concept. Same idea in its application. We're going to apply this Decor. The beauty of this is it's sold off the roll. If you had 200 feet of cement board is going to require you and your buddy to bring it all in the house. It's a little heavier, of course. This stuff is in a roll. It can go in under your arm. It's beautiful stuff. It's about $1.99 a square foot. So it's not ridiculously more expensive than cement board would be. Maybe, actually I'm not sure, maybe 50 cents or something a foot, but well worth it. Very convenient, very lightweight. And same premise. We're going to prep our plywood down to the plywood, and we're going to, instead of applying this, we're just applying this. And here we don't require the screws that we talked about with this, that we have to put all the screws in first. So, with this, in your book, in your do-it-yourselfer book, I also included a sheet on this Decor that tells you the trowel sizes. Generally with the regular Decor, this will come in a couple of different sizes. It comes in what the regular Decor, which 9 out of 10 will use, is about an 1/8 of an inch. There's also a Decor XL, which is a 1/4 of an inch. Really the only purpose you're going to use that for is to raise your floor a bit more. It's not necessarily stronger, it just gives us the flexibility of 2 different sizes. So that if we need to come up higher, then we might consider the Decor XL, which is just a little bit thicker. And then of course, I'm not going to elaborate too much on this, there's also Decor Heat, which is the newest form of in-floor heat, which is really cool. That's a coupling membrane as well, but the heat goes right through it, so that's really handy. Anybody who's interested in that, we can talk about that after class. Actually, I'll pass it out there. You're welcome to have a look at it. That acts as in-floor heat and your substrate all in one, so really, really convenient. So, same idea here. We're using our Decor. we're going to prep the area. If you're using regular Decor, chances are you're going to use a 1/4 inch by 3/16 trowel, and it's usually a V-notch. You don't need that surface to be too thick because we're not laying tile, we're just laying that Decor mat down. It's got a fiber backing. It just needs to grab the thin set on your substrate. Decor membrane requires 2 types of adhesive. With this, I said we could use the modified adhesive underneath the board. You can really use whatever adhesive you want underneath the board, and the modified on top. With this, they do not want you, because of drying times and because of the material that this is a poly type material, they want you to use unmodified mortar to tile over this. And it's all about dry time, but underneath on plywood they want you to use modified. So we have used the Ultraflex to lay this down on plywood. If this were a cement surface and you were using it as a crack isolation membrane, or you wanted to raise the floor on your concrete, you would use unmodified underneath and above. But with plywood, it's, and I know it can be confusing, unmodified on top, but modified to glue the mat down. So now we have the mat down, and we're just going to push it into place. And again, when I'm putting this mat down, I'm going to check it and make sure that I've got good adhesion and that I've got lots of contact. Lots of thin set there. We want to make sure that that is actually grabbing that for it. We cover 100% of it. And there's our substrate. So you can notice already, if we were concerned about height and we thought the 1/4 inch was just a little too big and it was going to bring our tile up too high to our existing hardwood, this is already below this. So it gives us a little grace. And now we're ready to tile. It's just that easy. This stuff is great for that reason. You lay it down. It actually comes on a roll that's 39 inches wide. Excuse me. And we just roll it off the roll by the footful. So we can get you whatever you need off the roll. And then you just, again, you butt them together. You don't need to tape them, just get them close together. If you have to add another sheet to that to complete that area, just make sure you bring it in very close to it like that. Don't leave any seams. Get it tucked right in there, nice and close. You're good to go. They will tell you that you can tile the same day. With that, I prefer myself to let that dry, but technically once that's down, you can walk on it, and it's, you know, that matting really grabs that plywood in that thin set. I like to leave it if you can afford to, and then come back the next day and it's a solid mass and you're ready to tile. Same premise now. We're ready to tile. This time I'm going to show you edging. Let's assume we're getting to the end of the room and we need to use edging. Edging is going to be used at doorway seams, transitions to hardwood, transitions to any floor, carpet, anywhere tile ends and some other flooring continues. We want some kind of edging. What it does is it acts as a buffer between it. It protects the edge of the tile as well. We have a bunch of different formats that I can show you. We have carpet reducers. We have reducers that go right down to the floor if we're on a concrete floor, for example, in the basement, and we just don't want to kick the lip. We have a reducer. All kinds of colors, chrome, bright chrome, titanium, black, brown. We've got all kinds of different persuasions of it. So this you can cut with a hacksaw or tile nippers. You will predetermine, if I'm at a doorway, for example, and I'm coming in with my last tile, I'll predetermine the length that I need there, and cut it to that desired length. Pretty easy stuff to work with. You can see I can snip that off very easily, and that is usually your last row of tile. That edging is generally going under, you're working your way out of the room, and that edging will go under the last tile to protect it. While we're getting into edging, I'm also going to demonstrate cutting. So before we put our last tile down there, we'll talk a little bit about cutting tile. So I demonstrated earlier, and I'm going to carry away on that one. Your straight cuts will all be done on your score and snap cutter. So when you come into an area and you have to determine a cut, you're going to mark your, mark it more in the center. You're going to mark your tile where you need to cut it on either side, and you're going to put it in your tile cutter. You're going to get that nasty glass cutting sound. And you put it in your cutter, and you'll just score and snap, hence the name. Some of the stronger tiles, 12 by 24s and 18 by 18 porcelains, are not quite as easy to do that with to score and snap. Another trick that's quite handy, assuming this is a great big 12 by 24, if I had to cut that and it goes a really, really strong porcelain, another good trick to do is to score it. And if you score that and you hold that firmly in your hand and you take that score line to the corner of anything but the dining room table, brickwork outside, something, and give that a good solid shot on the back of that. This is the glass cutting premise. It just needs a little force. And look at that, perfect cuts. Great trick on 12 by 24 porcelains because they can be very strong and a little more difficult to cut. If you've got cuts that are on the outside perimeter of the tile and you're taking off just a little strip like that, maybe an inch or 3/4 of an inch, generally you're going to run that through your wet saw because it's very hard to score and snap with that little breaker foot and take that little piece off. So that's when our wet saw comes in here. You definitely want to have a wet saw and a score and snap at the very least. The wet saw is going to do our corner cuts. So slot cuts, corner cuts. I'm going to show you a couple of different cuts. When we get to a heat register, for example, we may, God forbid it falls right in the middle. If it does, we'll talk about the grinder. But generally, we may come into a heat register where we have to mark a little notch on one of our tiles to fit around that heat register. So we'll mark it, determine the other tile will be out here, of course, and that's what's called a notch cut. To accomplish that notch cut, what we'll do is we'll mark it, pre-mark it, of course, because we laid our tile out, and then we'll do a series of cuts. Bear with me here, this makes a little bit of noise, but we'll do a series of cuts. A little bit more water in there. And this is a water saw, so that generally keeps the dust down. These are little portables. They throw a little bit of water, so if you're renting one of these, you'll want to put it up in the garage. So I'm going to make a series of tap them off. That's how easy it is. The more tenacious or stronger the tile, the more of those finger cuts I do. And if you had any roughness, that's what the tile nippers are for. Just tidy those up. Chances are, any cuts like that, I'm not too concerned about a little wiggly line here because the heat register's going to go over it and nobody's going to see it. So we just want to cut around it so we can function and get that heat register back in. So that's what's called a notch cut. Then there's a corner cut. Of course, that's very straightforward, like any saw. You know, we're just going to mark it, and we're going to cut the two angles. Remember that this saw, and I want you to be comfortable using it. This is a diamond blade. It cuts tile, not fingers. There's no teeth on it. It's not strong enough to take this tile out of your hand. by any stretch. As a matter of fact, you saw it, I think you probably noticed earlier, if I turn a little bit on it, actually will slow right down. So I'm not terribly worried about that. I'm going to take my corner cutout the same way. I'm going to run it through on my left. I'll make it a shorter cut. That's awfully loud. And then in the other. And there's my corner cut. Took my notch out. I'm going to fit in around whatever corner was required. Got to come in around a cabinet or something. There it is. Fits nicely into the corner, and we're good to go. So, tile cutter, store and snap, all your straight cuts, wet saw, all your notch and or corner type cuts. If you're doing the dreaded circular cut, which is the least favorite, probably the most difficult cut to do in tiling, circular cuts around toilet flanges, water feeds to toilets, any circular cut required. If it's on the outside perimeter and you got really lucky and you met the toilet flange right in the middle of two tiles, well, good for you, you got lucky. You can do that notch cut thing I said, except it's circular. You marked it and you put notch cuts in and you wrote them on. But if it's in the middle of a tile, which is much more difficult to do, that's when we enlist our grinder. So we got unlucky and our toilet flange fell right in the middle of our tile. Then we enlist our grinder. I'm not going to fire this up because this is even louder and nastier. You're going to want to take this outside. We do offer cuts for this. I know not everybody has a grinder and a diamond blade at home, so often we'll have our customers come in and say, can you cut these for me? Within 2 or 3 days, we can have them cut for you and bring them back to her, and you can pick them up. About $10 for a circular cut. But if you do have this at your disposal, the diamond blades that go on the 4-inch grinder, they're only $20. And they are wonderful for cutting this. So what we're going to do with a circular cut like that, we're going to take our grinder and we're going to plunge cut down on that. So when we plunge cut down on that, because of the shape of the blade, only this part is penetrating. So we plunge cut down and we make a bunch of different angles in that circular cut. The toilet flange is this big, so we've got lots of room to get this grinder down and move it across to the lines. Once we get a series, it's kind of like cutting a pizza. You're going to cut a bunch of different triangles. Once you get that cut to a bunch of several pieces, you can start to tap them out like I did on the, or you can actually take the grinder around the outside perimeter. Smaller holes, not quite as easy to do. Feed holes, plumbing holes, shower holes on walls, pipes that are a little smaller. They're a little bit more difficult. What we do here is we mark where we determine the cut it has to be, mark it in, then I measure on the back, in, and transcribe it to the back in the exact same place, and we come in the back. And the reason we do that is because we're going to make a bit of a mess of this. We're going to plunge cut again into that, on the back of course, and take a couple of cuts, and then what I do is I'll fan it out. And by fanning, actually I'll stand so you guys can see that silly. I'll fan it like this. And what we're doing is we're sort of digging a ditch on the back of the tile. And again, because it's shaped like that, it's only this part that's really penetrating. Yes, we're going to go out beyond that circle, but nobody's going to see that. And the deepest part of the cut is in the central part of the hole that counts. Once we get that down to almost the thickness of the tile, I guarantee you, you can go over to the other side and just tap it out. And then get up underneath with these tile nippers and you can trim that out. Again, not concerned that that hole looks like that when it's cut. It's all rough and rugged. As long as it fits over and the grout joints line up that I need it to, we know there's some kind of plumbing finishing piece that goes over top of it that nobody is going to see that rugged cut. Then we're going to fill that back hollow part with thin sets, so we're not worried about that either. Nobody's going to walk near that, so there's no concern over the strength of the edge of it. It's a pipe fitting of some kind, so nobody's going to go near it. That's your circular cut. So that's our different types of cuts. Now we're going to mix a second adhesive. That's Carabond I have here. I also have a product called Carabond T, which is for larger format tiles, a bit more coarse. and we're going to mix unmodified now. Obviously, I have one adhesive here out of convenience today, but let's assume that this is our unmodified adhesive, and we're going to apply it to the Decor. Now, when I'm applying adhesive to the Decor, I like to apply it and take the margin end of the trowel when I apply it and fill the cavities as best as I can first. That way I know the fact, if I just trowel it over top and push it in, how do I know that a lot of the thin set isn't sinking into the cavities and then it's robbing me of the adhesion up top? So I fill them first and then gauge my trowel over top. So you take the flat end, the margin end of your trowel, and just fill those holes as best you can. And then I'll trowel. And again, you can back butter your tile if you so desire. And then we'll tooth out our trowel over that. Now we know we've got thin set in the pockets. And that's the whole concept of this Decor. Those pockets are designed like this. They actually go down like that, so the thin set gets down and is forced in and it can't come out. So we need to fill it. And then our edging, we don't have to secure the edging. The thin set's going to hold it down. I generally bring a little thin set to it to keep it in place. There's our edging, and you can see it's coming up through it to keep it in place. But also, the tile is going to keep it in place because it's going to be thin set down on top of it.
Is that still a peanut butter mixture?
Yeah, oh absolutely. And keep in mind, no, that peanut butter mixture is a consistent thing. And here we go. I've determined that I need an 8 mil. There's different depths of the edging too. And you can see I want that nice and clean. It's nice and smooth. And there's my transition. So I've got my tile butted up against my edging, nice smooth transition. Then the hardwood butts up against that. It allows the hardwood or the laminate to expand and contract. We know it's going to move. For those who like to tile right up to their hardwood and or laminate and then grout it, I guarantee you that grout's going to crack and separate in no time. Put it next to the metal. Have the hardwood or laminate come right to the metal. Nice and snug. It allows it to move, but it's brushed up against metal. Any grout can go into here. You can force grout in there if there's any room for it. And that gives you your expansion and contraction between the floors. If it were carpet, we would have had a carpet reducer, and I can show you all of those as your job requires, or whatever you need to see, I'll be happy to show you. Generally, when we're butting up flat, we're going to use this straight edging, and that gets that done. So that's our two processes of the installation of tile. Again, at the top of the Decor, I said below, we want to use, and the Decor form is in there, it shows you the different trowel uses. 1/4 inch by 3/16 V-notch underneath, because we don't need a lot, we don't need it cakey. All that's going to do is make it sort of wavy. We just want to stick it to the floor. Then over top, we're moving up again to 3/8 trowels, even 1/2 inch for the larger. We go to that desired trowel. We'll be sure to explain to you what you need if you're unsure based on what size tile you're working. Okay, so there's our 2 tile applications. We've installed our tile. Dry times are generally 24 hours. If we're installing tile and we're prepared to grout, I'm not going to finish that tile job at 9 o'clock on a Saturday night and expect to grout first thing in the morning. I want to give it 24 hours. I always like to give material 24 hours to dry at the very least. Leaving tile to dry for 2 or 3 days has never harmed anything. That's a good thing. All the moisture comes out of the inset. The moisture, any excess moisture that has to come out will come out through grout joints. And if we grout prematurely, that moisture may still be trying to escape, and it can cause what's called efflorescence, which is a sort of a salty effect to your grout. So give it that solid 24 hours to dry, and you'll then be ready to grout. So I'm going to move this thing out of the way, and I'm going to move my grouting table in, and I'm going to show you a quick demonstration on grouting. 24 hours. And we're now prepared to grout. And we'll talk about grout briefly here as well. Now, because we're doing floor grout or floor tile, we're obviously going to use floor grout. I've got two types of grout. I've got a sanded floor grout. We actually sell two. We've got what's called an ultra color grout. That's a quartz beaded rapid set grout. It's a really good grout. It reduces efflorescence. It sets very quickly though, so I recommend if you're going to use this type of grout, you maybe have two hands available, one grouting, one cleaning up after you. Always a good idea, and then you're not caught with grout haze. And we're going to talk about that too. I get lots and lots of people who come in to say to me, I applied my grout, it looked great while it was wet, now it's dry, and there's a haze all over it. Well, grout is tricky that way. When you apply grout, you often need to wipe that floor 5, 6, maybe even 7 times to get it all cleaned up. And I'll demonstrate that in just a second. This is my new favorite grout. We're going to have a draw for one of these today too. This is exceptional. This is called Flex Color CQ. This is a stain resistant grout, which is pre-mixed, which is a treat for everybody. Powder, you have to mix with water. You should mix the entire bag so you get all the colors. Color polymers that are in there, and get that consistent color. This one, you flip the lid, they even give us a free sponge. These are $5 a piece, so that's great. And as you can see here, it's pre-mixed, which is awesome. I'll tell you why. If you grout an area, and you mix the grout, and you do half a room and you get called away, and your grout dries, and you got to mix some more grout and re-grout, there's no guarantee that you're going to match that color 100%. The beauty of this, you can grout a section, you can stop, you can come back, grout again, and it's going to match it identically because it's pre-mixed and re-colored. So it's good to go. It's more expensive, obviously, than the regular grout, where you might spend just under $20 for this. This is $60. But it's stain resistant and gives you your $5 sponge. If I had this, I'd need to get the sponge. I'm already up to $25. Then I'm worried about my stain resistancy, so I want to buy grout protector. There's another $20. We're already up to $45. You're only 15 or $20 shy of the stain resistant grout. So this stuff, exceptional. We're going to use this pre-mixed, and it couldn't be any handier because I can just reach in there. I'll give it a little stir even though it's pre-mixed. It's been sitting. I'll give it a bit of a stir. And assuming that I am ready to grout, and just prior to grouting, I'll look at my project again, I'll walk over it, and I'll look for any high areas of thin set. If you've got thin set that have come up almost to the surface of the grout, take it out with either a utility knife or something you can rub in there. A utility knife will take that out. In 24 hours, that thin set is still soft enough that you can take a knife to it and just sort of dig out the high spots. Because if you don't, you'll see that thin set. So your grout comes along, you get to a high spot, and all of a sudden that silver grout turns to gray because that's the color of the thin set. Now we're ready to grout. So what do we need for grouting? Our bucket of water. Have a big bucket of water ready. Again, it never hurts, even if you're using this stuff, it never hurts to have more than one person. You can have one person grouting. If you're having any trouble, you guys can move in here and have a better look. Otherwise, we're just forcing grout in between all of our grout joints. Make sure you get every single spot. Once you have all your grout in, try and clean up as much of the excess as you can. Otherwise, you're doing it with your sponge, and that's just more work for you. So try and catch as much of it as you can. I generally go across the grout joints so as not to hollow them out. And there I go. I've got my grout applied. inspect as you go. Look for spots that you missed. You want to get them down. You don't want to have to worry about that later. And we're ready to go with our cleaning. I'm going to use my existing sponge. And this is where you want a big bucket of water, preferably a couple of sponges. And what you want to do, you don't want a saturated sponge. You want this could be just room temperature water. It doesn't have to be hot or necessarily cold. And then get every ounce of water you can out of it. If this is soaking wet, all you're going to do is move the grout around. If it's damp, the water's out of it, it's going to pick up the grout. Again, when I'm cleaning, I'm not going up and down the grout joint. The minute you start going up and down the grout joint, you'll hollow it out. And we don't want hollow grout joints because what's going to happen there is things are going to roll into it, stains, liquids, and things, and just sit there. We want it as high as possible, so to keep it as high as possible, I'm going across the grout joints, not up and down. Just give that a rub again. I'm watching as I go. If I notice a grout joint, if I have hollowed it out, I'm going to touch it up right now. If I notice a spot, there's a couple spots I can see right here that are missing grout. It's so much easier to apply it while it's still wet. Go. And this is probably, well it is, without a doubt, the least favorite part of the job for installers. They don't really fancy grouting because it's a bit of work and time consuming. It's just cleaning. So there I have, and as I told you earlier, right now when I look down on that, it's wet, it looks okay, but if I rub my hands across it, there's still a whole bunch of grout haze on there. So that's when we clean our sponges and get all the water out again. And we go over it a second, a third, a fourth, however many times it's required to get that down to the point where we've got all the grout haze off. Because that grout haze, when it dries, like the thin set, it's water soluble while it's wet. And it's a bit of a trick to get off when it dries. So here I'm trying to stay away from the grout joints, get that excess. And as I go across, I'm on an angle again. And then when we do get to the point after 3 or 4 cleanings, and just give it a wipe. So when you give that a wipe, you can tell by looking at it, okay, I'm good. I don't see any color from the grout. So I have, the other thing you can do is just give it a feel. There's a grit to this grout. So if you feel any of that grit whatsoever, you're not there yet. You haven't got it. Because I'll tell you, it's very sneaky. Grout haze is very sneaky in the sense that it looks awesome when it's wet. It's like washing the car. It looks great when it's wet. When it dries, that's when you see it. So that grout haze, it will appear, it'll look like frost on a windshield, and it is a son of a gun to get off if we leave it too dramatic. We leave too much of it. Okay? So we're not going to let that happen. Then we're going to inspect our grout joints, make sure they're all the way we like it. Even after it's dry, if we see anything that we don't like the looks of, we'll touch it up. Good to go. So obviously, it's fairly quick here. You can see over a large area that this is time consuming. It's not difficult, it just requires some time. I would highly suggest again that you have 2 pairs of hands. It's just so much easier for you. You're not worried about the grout setting. One person can concentrate on the application, the other person can follow a few feet behind, and they can clean. You don't necessarily need to leave this stuff sit for a dramatic length of time. You can apply grout because it's already pre-mixed for you, and you can clean almost immediately. Give it, just give it a moment or 2, but you can get in, if you're cleaning properly and you're not applying too much water, just damp sponges, you can go at it almost immediately. Okay, and there we go. We're grouted, we're good to go. Again, that grout, before I start driving fridges back in, stoves, I'm going to give that grout 24 hours. It's a cement, that's all it takes, and it's dry. 24 hours, and we're going to start rolling the furnishing back in, or we can walk on it, and we're good to go. If you use this stuff, you're done. You don't need to apply grout protector because it's stain resistant. You're good to go. If you use this stuff, give it a good solid 2 to 3 days to dry completely before you apply grout protection, which is a liquid that you just paint on. So I didn't mention that in the comparison of this. There's also, never mind the cost, but the labor that goes into applying grout protection to this, which is why this is so appealing in terms of the bathroom. For $60, in my book, it's well worth it. You grout it, you're done with it. It allows you to use lighter colors that you might not have used with the regular grout because we're afraid they're going to stain. It's not going to happen with this stuff. This stuff is awesome. Okay? So there you have it.